let's talk about some legendary minions we might see in Saviors of Uldum.
Hey buddy, watch this.
Yeah, for this video, I've gone to Uldum and World of Warcraft, looked around at some of the prominent characters, raid bosses, dungeon bosses, story characters, and determined ones that are pretty likely we could see in Saviors of Uldum. Now, of course, I have no idea what these actual cards are going to look like. This video is more focused on the lore and the background, maybe even like fight mechanics you might see in World of Warcraft, and determining what a card might look like based on those. So this video is really more focused on initial design than final design. I'm not going to say everything's perfectly balanced, but hopefully it does capture the essence or idea of some of these pretty cool Uldum characters. So up first here I have Dark Pharaoh Tekahn, who you might recognize from the Dalaran Heist. He is the warlock character you play as, and is apparently going to play a pretty big role in Saviors of Uldum, according to some voice lines from Rafam. So I clearly wanted to put him in here. He's also not just from Hearthstone. He is a prominent character in the Uldum zone in World of Warcraft. And I got this idea for the card from Pyrovok from Twitch chat. Many of you will know. He's a pretty big lore geek like me, and he thought this would be a cool way to capture the essence of the character in World of Warcraft. And there's a cool mechanic with Tekahn where when he dies, these immortal colossus that are otherwise immortal and immune to all damage also die. So why not capture that in a Hearthstone card? So that's what we've done here. Basically a big bomb Dr. Boom style card. You got one big dude in the middle, two smaller dudes on the side that can only die after Dark Pharaoh Tekahn dies. Otherwise, they're immune. So you've got these 3/3s that if your opponent can't deal with the 6 health of Tekahn, they're going to be able to take some valuable trades. You can buff them, do some sneaky things with them, so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's only 6 health to deal with, which for 8 mana plus isn't all that crazy. Before anybody out there freaks out about, oh, give them taunt, Regis, and your Tekahn will never die. Well, as we've seen in Hearthstone, giving taunt to an immune minion basically negates the taunt. It doesn't actually have taunt, so nothing sneaky there would happen. Although you could taunt other things and try to protect your Tekahn. It wouldn't be on an immune minion that creates this stalemate scenario for your opponent. So there are still ways to answer this thing. But even at the end of the day, if your opponent does kill the Tekahn, they still have to deal with the 3/3 stats of each of the Colossi. So you've got a big pile of stuff here spread across multiple minions, which is something Warlock likes. And just kind of a sneaky mechanic here that captures the character and could create some pretty interesting moments in Hearthstone too. So moving on here, I wanted to put in another villain legendary minion. We know that the heroes are getting basically the League of Explorer minions and then a legendary quest. So we know some of the villain classes are going to get probably a minion and also the legendary quest. And what are those minions going to be? I think Tekann's one, but also Commander Snots is this kind of evil goblin you got to deal with when you're questing in Uldum. He's a centerpiece for a lot of the quest storylines, and in particular, he's trying to get this Coffer of Promise, which has essentially like a key to the Halls of Origination, which is this Titan facility that they're going to try to use to do some nasty stuff. And capture that in this card, hopefully, with Commander Snots, a rogue minion. His battle cry is summon a 0/30 Coffin of Promise for your opponent. So kind of like Marin the Fox in a way where you're summoning the treasure and then you got to break open the treasure. But this isn't any ordinary treasure, right? This is like a super treasure. So it has 30 freaking health and it can only be destroyed by damage. So you can't like assassinate this thing. You have to actually chip through it with real damage. If you do, then you're going to receive an origination key, which just allows you to destroy the enemy hero. So this is kind of an alternate win condition. And you might say, well, Regis, why on earth would you ever want to do 30 damage to a minion when you could just do 30 damage to your opponent's face? And that's a pretty interesting question, right? But that's exactly why I made this card. Because, you know, some opponents have more than 30 health. Something like a warrior, for instance, could potentially have 70 health. And it's like, well, shoot, I can't deal with 70, but maybe I can still deal with 30 on the Coffer of Promise if I save up some resources, if I wait to use all my damage, play Commander Snots, then I have a 30 damage clock instead of a 70 damage clock, and that makes games achievable that otherwise might not be. Beyond that, some spells and damage stuff only works on minions. So for instance, think about like you could use rush minions to do damage immediately as opposed to waiting for them on board to get removed. You could use things like Vendetta, for instance, that only hits minions as opposed to the enemy face. So you can find extra faster instances of damage while hitting a minion than perhaps trying to hit your opponent's face. So Coffer of Promise basically gives you an alternate way to deal 30 damage and still win the game, which I think is a pretty fun mechanic while also capturing the idea here of Commander Snots and his efforts to obtain the treasures within the Coffer of Promise. So moving on here, I wanted to take a look at some possible neutral legendary minions. For instance, we have Prospector Gunston here, which is one of the kind of quest hub guys in Uldum. And in this case, he would be a 4-mana 3/3 with Battlecry, restore 10 health to your hero for each quest completed this game. So I wanted to base this one around questing because he is a guy you get quests from and turn quests into, and I love the mechanic in World of Warcraft where you go turn in all your quests, you get a ton of experience and you level up. And that's kind of what happens with the Prospector Gunston as well. Instead of leveling up, you're just gaining some health. You're gaining that experience. It's making you a little bit stronger. And if you just run one quest in your deck, this is at least a 10 health heal, which makes this kind of a better conditional antique heal bot. If you remember that card from back in the day, 5-mana 3/3 heal 8. That was a powerful and played card, but not crazy overpowered. But Gunston would feel like that in some cases. But if your opponent also ran a quest, note, this does not say a friendly quest. It says each quest completed this game. Then Gunston could heal for 20. So in a way, it kind of serves as a quest counter as well. Even if you're not running a quest, you could still theoretically run this card and gain some healing. But if you're both running quests, then the value really starts to ramp up. And then in wild format, of course, you could actually even run like multiple quests if you wanted. There could be like 4 quests per game, so he could heal for 30 plus depending on the scenario. So essentially here you have a card with a base level of power that is strong yet conditional, but also a lot of upside that still feels a bit like a reference to his World of Warcraft character because of that connection to quests. And we know that quests are going to be a prominent mechanic, of course, in Saviors of Uldum. Moving on here, we have King Phaoris. And for the story here on King Phaoris, it's essentially a guy you help kind of overtake the city and become the king. So I thought it'd be fun to capture a card here that gets stronger when it has allies. Like, that's what makes him the king and helps him win, essentially, is by having lots of friends. And that's what we do with this minion. So he has +1/+1 for each friendly minion on board. And you might look at that and be like, well, Regis, that's just like Frostwolf Warlord. That's boring, but it's very distinct, right? Frostwolf Warlord is a card that gains those stats via Battlecry. So there are 2 different important interactions there, right? Frostwolf Warlord, if you have 5 minions and you play it, he gets really, really big, and he stays really, really big, which is nice. But you can never play Frostwolf Warlord proactively or preemptively, whereas you can with King Phaoris. So with King Phaoris, if you have 5 minions on board and you play him, he's going to be a 9/9. But if your opponent kills a minion, because this is an actively updating stat buff, he goes down to 8/8. So there are some downsides there, where it's like, well, your opponent can kill the smaller stuff and then deal with Phaoris once he's gotten smaller. But on the other hand, you could play this on turn 4 and then play a bunch of minions on turn 5. Like, you could drop 4 or 5 lackeys and you could buff your King Phaoris to take an unexpected value trade or just do a ton of face damage. So it's this kind of ever rising and declining balance, and there's some really fun interactions there that basically say, like, well, how do I trade? I got to trade the right way. I got to trade these off. It becomes kind of like a sea giant that's different and more on board than like from hand. So you're always trying to manage exactly how to operate these different sorts of turns. And I think lots of decks could use this successfully. Any kind of lackey-based deck, zoo-style decks, just token decks in general could use this as a potential finisher or a setup kind of play. And I think that'd be pretty fun, if a little scary occasionally, still an interesting card mechanic. So moving on, I have a few cards here that are based on some dungeon bosses in the Halls of Origination. These are basically like the Titan Watchers protecting the facility, which, if things go poorly, is going to reorder and destroy all life, essentially, on the planet. So I wanted to capture this idea of, like, impending doom. If you don't deal with these dudes, then things are going to go really, really bad and snowball out of control for you. So these are kind of risk-reward minions that seem a little bit hard to balance and fine-tune, but I just like the idea that each of these are doing something. It's like, God, I got to deal with that or it's going to get really, really bad. So up first is Rajh, a 7-mana 7/7 that at the start of your turn deals 7 damage to the enemy hero. So a War Golem stat line may not seem that exciting, but if this is something that you can keep on board, whether just buffing its health, maybe giving it stealth, and your opponent can't deal with it, it's like this ultimate doomsayer that's just going to hit their face for 7, 14, 21. It only takes a couple turns to really make this thing super duper scary. Now, I don't immediately know what kind of deck would run this. I don't really think it fits in like an aggro deck, probably not even necessarily a combo deck. I don't know that a deck exists that would run this yet, but maybe, like I said, some kind of stealth giving thing, or just a deck that's curving out and needs some damage. Maybe just off random generation effects, a card like this would be fun, because it presents this really make or break scenario where it's like, God, I've got to deal with this, or this dude's going to blast me in the face with the power of the sun and deal 7 damage. And if I don't deal with it now, it's like, what's he going to do? Is he going to buff it? Is he going to hide it behind a taunt? I just have to resolve this. So maybe like a Luna's Pocket Galaxy Mage runs this as a potential finisher. You just slam it for 1 mana and you feel pretty good about it, right? I don't know. I just think it creates interesting scenarios and stories, and would be a pretty neat card to see in the game. So moving on here, I have Satesh, another one of these Guardians of the Halls of Origination. This time a 6 mana, 6/6 neutral legendary, and he reads at the start of your turn, summon a random chaos minion. And the this comes straight, by the way, from the mechanics of the actual boss fight. He'd summon 3 different kinds of dudes: Void Seekers, Void Sentinels, and Void Worms. And here I made each of them just really big 6 mana 6/6s that have pretty powerful effects. So if you let this guy go off and summon something, it's super scary, because suddenly you've got 12/12 in stats, and God forbid he lives for multiple turns, and then it's like, geez, this is getting out of hand. So it takes that Doomsayer, or even validated Doomsayer from back in the day, and ramps it up a ton, because it's just got a big stat line and some really, really big upside. So Void Seeker just reduces the attack of all enemy minions on board, making it even harder to catch up. The Void Sentinel makes it very difficult to deal with the minion, because you can't trade into it very effectively. And the Void Worm just gives you even more big, scary stats on board, where you've got 3 things to deal with now instead of 2. And you can imagine if a couple of these go off, just forget about it. Your time is done, right? Too much value is generated, too much board presence has been achieved. So again, you create a scenario where it's like, I've got to save some resources for turn 6 in case there's that Satesh. Got to run, a Siphon Soul to deal with that thing. I've got to be ready for this card if it's being run in the meta, and that kind of reshapes how decks are played and how decks are built, and becomes a powerful asset. But again, a pretty risky play. It's a bad Boulder Fist Ogre. If your opponent has a board that trades into effectively, or just an easy way to deal with it, then you've run a pretty weak card. So again, high risk, super high reward, but some scary snowball potential that will get out of control if you don't deal with it immediately. So then finally here, our last card of the video is Amune, a 5 mana 5/5, another one of these dungeon bosses with a beginning of turn effect. His is that he gives all friendly minions +3/+3. Keep in mind, it doesn't say other friendly minions. He is a friendly minion himself. So even if he's on board alone, he becomes a 5 mana 8/8, which is scary. But as soon as he has 1 or 2 other things on board, the value really starts to swing out of control. So your opponent has a couple ways they could deal with this, right? They could kill other minions on board, so they reduce the number of buffs, or they kill Amune himself. If they are able to do one of those 2 things, they have a decision point to make. But as a 5 health minion, not particularly difficult to kill. A lot of ways to answer it, both via single target removal, also just damage on board, and a card that's probably only great if you're already ahead on board. So high risk, high reward, but captures this character because he's more about like bringing life and healing and growing stuff. So this one needed to be a little bit more supportive of an effect as opposed to destructive like our previous cards. But you can imagine this going absolutely crazy in a token deck, or just completely backfiring in a token deck where you've wasted 5 mana instead of doing something impactful. Again, that's just by design and captures the impending doom aspect of these cards. Love it or hate it, that's where I went for these. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on both the balance, but also just capturing the mechanics and ideas of these characters rather nicely. And there you go, folks. Those are some potential legendary minions we might see based on the activities in Uldum and World of Warcraft. Now, Hearthstone has a tendency to just make up characters too, so there'll probably be some stuff we've never heard of or never seen before. But even if just 1 or 2 of these characters shows up in the game, that's something I'd love to see. I love when we go back to known, recognizable lore characters and, showcase some of the cool stuff they've done in World of Warcraft, and a couple of these cards would do that rather effectively. Now, that said, I'm curious what you guys think. What characters would you like to see from Uldum? Will we see a new version of Alec here, for instance? Will we just sadly get another version of Rafam for the class cards? I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on these cards, other ideas, what you do differently. Isisat, who I didn't put in the video, maybe you got some thoughts on what she might look like as the fourth dungeon boss there in Halls of Origination. Share all that in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.